The reactor was wrong. Lieutenant Commander Soren Kale pressed his palm against the coolant manifold and felt the hum before his instruments confirmed it. 62 hertz, a frequency that shouldn't exist in a vessel this old, in a hull this dead, in a corridor no living engineer had walked in 400 years. His headlamp carved a pale cone through the dust, and he pulled his hand back and looked at it. The grime on his glove was warm. "Kale, you reading this?" Chief Petty Officer Daria Len's voice crackled through his helmet speaker, thin with static. She was 3 decks above, pulling breaker panels in the auxiliary bridge. "I'm getting ghost voltage on bus 7. Somebody left the lights on." "Nobody left anything on," Kale said. "This ship has been dead since before the Velthari Compact existed." He didn't say what he was thinking, which was that the 9th Meridian had no business humming at all. The derelict had been found 12 hours ago by a Terran Frontier Survey crew mapping the edges of the Kethai's expanse, a region of dead space so empty that most galactic cartographers marked it with a single glyph meaning, nothing worth recording. The ship was embedded nose first in the crust of a rogue planetoid, half buried under silicate and ice, its aft section jutting from the rock like a broken sword. No transponder, no beacon, no recognition in any Terran naval registry within the last 3 centuries. Survey Command had flagged it as a salvage curiosity and sent Kale's engineering team from the TFS Harrogate to crack it open and determine if anything inside was worth pulling. 12 hours in, Kale had determined that nothing about this ship made sense. The hull composition was wrong. Standard Terran warships used a titanium-vanadium composite rated to 1,400 megapascals. He'd taken a sample from the outer plating and run it through the portable spectrometer twice. The results came back as a ceramic-metallic hybrid with a tensile strength his instrument couldn't resolve. It simply returned a value followed by an error flag he'd never seen before. The number it tried to display was 11,600. The internal layout was wrong. Warships of the era this vessel appeared to belong to late 23rd century, based on the corridor geometry and the hatch design language, ran between 310 and 380 meters. The 9th Meridian, as Kale had started calling it after the faded designation stenciled on a bulkhead in a script style nobody on his team recognized, was at least 1,100 meters from what remained of the bow to the reactor compartment where he now stood. No Terran warship built in the 23rd century had been longer than 400. The weapons were wrong. He'd found the first battery on Deck 9, 8 rail accelerator capacitor banks, each one holding enough energy to punch a tungsten slug through a cruiser's spine at 17 kilometers per second. He'd checked the discharge logs. The last firing date was stamped in a calendar system that didn't match any Terran standard he knew. When he'd converted it through 3 different historical reference tables, the date came back as roughly 2297 CE, 391 years ago. Nobody had fired those guns in 391 years, but the capacitor banks were at full charge, not residual, not degraded, full charge as if someone had topped them off yesterday. And the reactor was wrong because a reactor that had been cold for 4 centuries did not hum. He checked his suit chronometer, 3:47 local. The Harrogate was in a parking orbit 600 kilometers above the planetoid, and Captain Vasic had given them until 600 to finish the preliminary survey and report. Kale had 3 hours and 13 minutes to explain why a ship that didn't exist was still alive. "Daria, I'm heading deeper. Reactor compartment aft section. I don't know. The deck numbering stopped making sense 2 sections back." "Copy. Watch your O2. The Harrogate's shuttle only packed 12 hours of reserve and you've been breathing hard." She wasn't wrong. He'd been breathing hard since he found the weapon's battery. Something about seeing those fully charged capacitor banks, pristine, humming with potential energy, maintained by some invisible hand across 4 centuries of vacuum and silence, had shifted something in his understanding of what this ship was. A derelict didn't maintain its weapons. A ruin didn't keep its powder dry. Only a vessel with purpose did that. He kept moving aft, past compartments that should have been standard crew quarters, but were instead filled with equipment he couldn't identify, sealed cabinets marked with serial numbers in that same unfamiliar script, racks of what appeared to be replacement parts for systems that didn't exist in any engineering manual he'd studied. One compartment held nothing but a single chair facing a curved display panel, its screen dark, with input devices molded for human hands. An operator's station for something, he didn't know what. 2 decks down, he found the medical bay. It was pristine, instruments sealed in transparent cases, beds with integrated monitoring systems that looked generations ahead of the Harrogate sickbay. The medical supplies had long since expired, their containers marked with dates in the 2290s, but the equipment itself hummed with standby power. A surgical array suspended from the ceiling had calibrated itself when he entered the room. He watched its articulated arms test their range of motion, cycling through positions, and then return to rest. 400 years since the last patient, and the surgical array was still ready. He found a crew locker room. Personal effects were gone, the original crew had packed out completely, taking everything. No photographs, no personal items, no indication of who had served here. But the lockers themselves told a story. 340 of them, each one labeled with a billet number and a duty station code. Engineering, weapons, helm, tactical, medical. Command, damage control, 8 teams of 5. And one label he didn't recognize, strategic assessment. Whatever that was, it had its own section of 12 lockers, separated from the rest by a reinforced bulkhead with a biometric lock that his credentials couldn't open. There were things on this ship that even a provisionally authorized engineer wasn't meant to see. He moved through the reactor compartment hatch, and the corridor beyond opened into something he didn't expect. The passage widened into a long gallery with transparent panels on both sides, looking down into the engineering core. Cale stopped walking and stared. The core was enormous, 3 decks deep at least, and shaped nothing like any reactor he'd studied at the academy or maintained in 14 years of fleet service. Where a standard fusion bottle used magnetic confinement rings arranged in a toroidal configuration, this used, he counted, 19 interlocking rings arranged in a spherical lattice, each one still faintly glowing with a residual blue-white light that pulsed at the same 62 Hz frequency he'd felt through the manifold. The light was dim enough that he would have missed it if the gallery hadn't been pitch dark, but it was there, 19 rings, pulsing, in the belly of a ship that predated his great-grandmother's birth. Daria. Go. I'm looking at the reactor. And it's not a reactor, I don't know what it is, but it's not dead. Silence on the channel. Then, define not dead, Cale, because I'm standing next to the auxiliary bridge and 3 of the consoles just lit up, on their own, in a 400-year-old wreck. One of them is running some kind of atmospheric analysis of the compartments we've entered. It's testing whether the air we're bringing in through our suit seals is breathable. Cale felt the hairs on the back of his neck lift inside his suit collar. He pressed his visor against the transparent panel and looked down at the spherical lattice, counting the rings again. 19, each one roughly 12 meters in diameter, each one emitting a pulse of light that traveled around the ring's circumference in exactly 1.2 seconds. He timed it against his chronometer. 1.2 seconds, every ring. Perfectly synchronized. He was an engineer. He'd spent 14 years fixing things that broke. He knew the difference between a machine that was shutting down and a machine that was waking up. This machine was waking up. Get off the ship, he said. What? Get everyone off the ship. Now, tell Vasek to pull the Harrogate back to a safe distance. I'll stay and monitor. Cale, you don't get to be the hero. We're a survey team, not. Daria, the weapons battery on Deck 9 is fully charged and the reactor is cycling. This ship is activating. I need you to get clear so I can figure out why before it finishes." He heard her breathing change. She'd served with him long enough to know when he wasn't being dramatic. Acknowledged, "I'm pulling the team. You have your O2 until 5:30. After that, I'm coming back for you whether you like it or not." "Understood." He listened to her relay the evacuation order to the 6 other engineers scattered through the wreck. Their responses came in clipped and professional, boots already moving. He waited until the last of them confirmed departure from the hull, then turned back to the gallery and the impossible reactor beneath him. He descended a ladder into the core chamber. The rungs were cold under his gloves, but the air temperature, his suit's external sensor read it at 4.2 degrees Celsius, impossibly warm for a derelict in hard vacuum embedded in a rogue planetoid. Something was generating heat. Something had been generating heat for a very long time. At the base of the ladder he found a console. It was covered in a fine layer of silicate dust, but when his boot hit the deck plate in front of it, the screen illuminated. White text on black, a prompt in English. 9th Meridian TFN prototype designation, Ghost Lance. Commission date, 22910-417. Core status, dormant preservation mode active. Crew complement, 0 of 340. Time since last crew departure, 142,871 days. Awaiting authorized engineering officer. Cale read it 3 times. Then he pulled up his suit calculator and divided 142,871 by 365.25. 391 years. The ship had been waiting for 391 years, not dead, not derelict, waiting. TFN was Terran Federation Navy. The designation existed. But prototype and Ghost Lance, those words didn't appear in any historical database he'd ever accessed. He'd spent 2 years at the Fleet Archives on Europa during his postgraduate work. He'd read every declassified hull designation from the 22nd century through the 27th. Ghost Lance had never appeared. Not once. Not as a canceled program, not as a proposed concept, not even as a footnote. It had been scrubbed completely. He leaned closer to the screen and noticed a detail he'd missed. Below the main status readout, a smaller line of text was scrolling. A log. Entries dated in that same unfamiliar calendar system, each one a single line. He translated the most recent ones. Day 142,871. Self-repair cycle complete. Hull section 14C restored to 97.8%. Day 142,870. WAPONS diagnostic. All batteries nominal. Day 142,869. Atmospheric reprocessing. Compartment air quality VERIFIED. Day 142,868. Sensor sweep. No contacts. Every day, for 391 years, the ship had been running a daily diagnostic, checking its hull, testing its weapons, sweeping for contacts, maintaining breathable air in sealed compartments every single day. 142,871 consecutive entries, not one missed. The discipline of it, the sheer mechanical patience, made Cale's throat tight. This wasn't a derelict running residual programs. This was a vessel performing its duty, alone in the dark, for longer than most nations lasted. His hand moved toward the console before his brain caught up. The screen changed. Biometric scan complete. Engineering credentials, VERIFIED TFN LT, CMDR, grade active. Authorization level, provisional. Core ready for diagnostic cycle. Initiate YN. He pulled his hand back. The ship had scanned him through his suit glove. It had accessed somehow, through a 400-year gap in technology, his current biometric profile, and verified his engineering credentials against the modern Terran Federation Navy personnel database. Either it had a communications link he couldn't detect, or it had predicted what the modern credential structure would look like based on whatever it had known 4 centuries ago. Neither option was comforting, but the word that caught his eye, the word that made his engineer's brain pause and recalibrate, was provisional. Not full authorization, provisional. The ship was granting him limited access, enough to run a diagnostic, not enough to unlock everything. It was treating him the way a secure system treats an unknown user with legitimate credentials, cautiously, respectfully, but with boundaries. Whatever was behind those locked bulkheads in the strategic assessment section, whatever the biometric lock had refused to open, was above his clearance, even now, even as the only human aboard. He pressed Y. The 19 rings above him shifted. The blue-white pulse brightened, and the hum he'd felt through the manifold became audible, a low, resonant thrumming that he felt in his sternum and in the bones of his jaw. The rings began to rotate, each on a different axis, their paths interlocking without collision in a dance that spoke of engineering precision, so far beyond what he knew that he could only stand and watch. Data cascaded across the console. He read each line with the trained eye of a man who had spent his career translating machine readouts into plain truth, and each line made the truth stranger. Ghost Lance Diagnostic, Phase 1 of 7. Hull integrity, 97.3%. Self-repair SYSTMS nominal, 0.4% annual restoration rate. Weapons 8 of 8 rail. Accelerator batteries charged 100%. 4 of 4 directed energy ARRAYS charged 100%. 2 of 2 gravitational lance projectors charged 98.7%. Propulsion, phase shift drive nominal dormant. SUBLIGHT, ion fusion hybrid 12G maximum sustained. Defensive, hull integrated reactive armor self-healing. Phase cloak dormant, requires full crew to activate. Electronic warfare suite, passive mode. Core, 19-ring spherical lattice reactor, preservation mode. Estimated full power output, 4.7 times 1016 watts. Fuel reserve, 89.2% estimated operational endurance. 340 years AT full power. Kale's breath stopped. 4.7 times 10 to the 16th watts, the most powerful warship currently in the Terran fleet, the Sovereign-class dreadnought, produced 2.1 times 10 to the 13th. The 9th Meridian's reactor output was more than 2,000 times greater. He ran the ratio 3 times on his suit calculator, certain he'd misplaced a decimal. He hadn't. 12G sustained acceleration. Modern warships maxed out at 4. At 12G, the inertial forces alone would pulp an unprotected crew, which meant the ship had internal compensation systems beyond anything in the current fleet. A gravitational lance. He didn't even know what that meant. The term existed nowhere in the weapons taxonomy. He'd studied every weapons system in the Terran arsenal as part of his ordnance integration qualification. Directed energy, kinetic, nuclear, antimatter, electromagnetic pulse. He knew them all. Gravitational lance was not among them. And the ship had been maintaining itself for 400 years, slowly repairing its own hull at 0.4% annually, meaning that over 391 years it had effectively rebuilt itself 1.5 times over. The hull he'd sampled on the outer plating wasn't original. It was regrown. The ceramic-metallic hybrid that his spectrometer couldn't classify was the ship's own tissue, regenerated from internal material reserves, molecule by molecule, day after day, for nearly 4 centuries. The ship had been healing its own wounds in the dark, keeping its weapons charged, keeping its reactor in preservation mode, keeping the lights ready to come on, keeping breathable air in sealed compartments, running 142,871 consecutive daily diagnostics without missing one, all while embedded in a rock in the emptiest corner of known space, waiting for an authorized engineer to walk aboard and press a button. The fuel reserve read 89.2%. After 391 years of continuous operation in preservation mode, the ship had consumed only 10.8% of its fuel. Whatever reactor technology powered the 19-ring lattice, it was so efficient that 4 centuries of operation barely registered on the gauge. The estimated operational endurance at full power, not preservation mode, but full combat power, was 340 years. Cale did the math twice and then sat with the number. A ship that could fight at full output for longer than most civilizations maintained their archives. Cale, this is Vasek. The captain's voice cut through his helmet speaker, harder than Daria's, edged with the particular tension of a commanding officer who has just been told that something is wrong. Len tells me the wreck is activating. Report. Captain, the wreck is not a wreck. It's a Terran Federation Navy prototype warship, designation Ghost Lance, commissioned in 2291 and placed in some kind of dormancy. It's been maintaining itself for 391 years. It just recognized my engineering credentials and initiated a diagnostic cycle. Silence. Then say again the power output. 4.7 times 10 to the 16th watts, sir. More silence. Cale could hear Vasek processing that number. The Harrogate was a modern frigate. Its total reactor output was 1.8 times 10 to the 12 watts. The number Cale had just spoken was 26,000 times that. Cale, I'm contacting Fleet Command. Do not activate anything else. Do not. The console chimed. A new message appeared. Proximity alert. 17 unidentified VESSELS detected, entering local space. Classification: VASHKRI Predation Flotilla. Estimated arrival: 41 minutes. Threat assessment: extreme. Ghost Lance recommends full activation. Cale stared at the screen. He didn't recognize the name Vashkari. He pulled his personal datapad from his suit pocket and searched the current galactic threat database. The entry was sparse and marked with a red border he'd never seen on a threat profile before, the classification used for species that had been contacted but never communicated with, species whose behavior patterns were understood only from the wreckage they left behind. Vashkari, a nomadic predator species collective operating at the extreme edge of mapped space. No diplomatic contact. No recorded communication. No treaty, no territorial claim, no demand. Known behavior: locate inhabited systems, strip them of organic resources, meaning people, and move on. 17 documented incursions over the last 8 decades. 0 survivors from contacted populations. The Terran Federation standing order regarding Vashkari contact was a single word: evacuate. 0 survivors. Across 80 years and 17 incursions, not one person who had been in the path of a Vashkari flotilla had ever been recovered alive. And 17 of their ships were 41 minutes away. Captain, we have incoming. 17 Vashkari vessels 41 minutes out. Vasek's response was immediate and stripped of every pretense. The Harrogate can't fight the Vashkari. We are a survey frigate. Our armament is. I know what our armament is, sir. 12-point defense guns and 2 torpedo tubes. The Vashkari's organic projectile launchers would breach our hull in the first volley. The Harrogate wasn't built for combat. It was built to map star fields and catalog mineral deposits. Then we run. They're faster than us, sir. The database says their cruising speed is 6.8 times our maximum. They'd overtake us in 19 minutes. And there's nowhere to run to. The nearest Terran outpost is the Kethai's way station, 14 hours away at our best speed. We'd be dead 11 hours before we got there. He heard Vasek's XO, Lieutenant Commander Priya Oski, murmur something in the background. Cale caught only the tail end. 211 people, sir. 211 people, crew of the TFS Harrogate. Engineers, technicians, sensor operators, medical staff, shuttle pilots, a cook, 2 administrative officers, and a ship's counselor who had signed up for a 6-month frontier survey and was now 41 minutes from a species that had never left survivors. Another silence. This one was colder. Cale could hear the Harrogate's bridge behind Vassic, the murmur of voices, the sharp tone of a tactical alert. "How fast is that ship you're standing on?" Cale looked at the console. The diagnostic was still running, phase 3 of 7. The propulsion data was already on screen. Phase shift drive, capable of TRNSLUMINAL displacement. SUBLIGHT. 12G sustained, 19G burst, 34 SECONDS maximum. Estimated velocity AT maximum SUBLIGHT, 0.41 c. 0.41 times the speed of light on sublight engines alone. The Harrogate could manage 0.003. "Fast enough, sir, but I can't fly it. The console says it needs a full crew of 340 for the phase cloak, and I don't even know what the phase shift drive does. I'm an engineer, not a pilot." "Then what can you do?" Cale looked at the weapon's status. All batteries charged. The console had already identified the Vashkari and classified them as an extreme threat. The ship was asking him to activate it. The ship had, in fact, been built specifically for this, built for a moment when something came out of the dark that could not be negotiated with, could not be deterred, could not be outrun. He scrolled through additional diagnostic data while he thought. The phase shift drive, the transluminal displacement system listed in the propulsion readout, had its own section. He read it. The drive didn't accelerate the ship through normal space. It shifted the ship's quantum state, translating its mass from one spatial coordinate to another without traversing the distance between them. The theoretical papers that described such a system had been classified as physically impossible by the Terran Academy of Sciences in 2341. 50 years after the Ghost Lance program had built one that worked. The phase cloak was even more unsettling. It didn't hide the ship behind electromagnetic countermeasures or sensor jamming. It shifted the ship partially out of phase with normal space, rendering it undetectable to any sensor that operated within standard physical parameters. The ship became, for all practical purposes, a ghost, present but imperceptible, occupying space without being part of it. The cloaking system required a full crew complement of 340 to maintain, because the phase state calculations required human neural input distributed across multiple stations. The computer could calculate the shift, but only human brains, in sufficient numbers, could stabilize it. That was why the ship needed a crew, not just to operate the weapons or manage the reactor, to think. The Ninth Meridian used its crew's neural processing as a component of its most advanced systems. 340 human minds, linked through their stations, providing the computational substrate that the ship's computer couldn't replicate. The engineers who designed the Ghost Lance hadn't just built a warship. They had built a symbiotic system, a vessel that was more than the sum of its metal and circuits, because it incorporated the one thing that no machine could duplicate: human judgment. He thought about the crew complement line. 0 of 340. 340 officers and enlisted personnel had walked off this ship 391 years ago and never come back. They'd left it here, in the emptiest corner of space, with its reactor in preservation mode and its weapons charged, and its hull slowly healing itself in the dark. They'd left it, and they'd erased it from every database. Why? The answer came to him with the cold clarity of an engineer reading a schematic. They'd erased it because it was too powerful. Because a ship with 2,000 times the reactor output of a modern dreadnought and a weapons system that included something called a gravitational lance was not a warship. It was a strategic error. It was the kind of thing that, once built, could never be unbuilt, could never be trusted in anyone's hands, could never be allowed to exist in a galaxy where its mere presence would reshape every balance of power that had been carefully, painfully, expensively maintained. They'd built the ultimate warship, and then they'd been afraid of what they'd built. And rather than destroy it, because an engineer who builds something that perfect does not destroy it, not willingly, not ever, they'd hidden it, put it to sleep, given it a preservation mode and a self-repair system and a set of instructions that said, wait, wait for someone who needs you, wait for the right kind of trouble. And now, 391 years later, it was asking Soren Kale, a lieutenant commander who fixed broken fuel injectors and calibrated targeting sensors for a living, to wake it up. 37 minutes. Captain, I need you to do something for me. I'm listening. The Harrogate has 211 crew. I need every one of them on this ship in the next 20 minutes. Kale. Sir, the 9th Meridian can fight the Vashkari. The Harrogate cannot. If we run, they catch us in 19 minutes. If we stay in the Harrogate, they kill us. But this ship, I've seen the diagnostics, sir. If I can bring it to full power with enough hands to operate the critical stations, we have a chance. The only chance we're going to get. You're asking me to abandon my ship and board a 400-year-old prototype that nobody has ever heard of, based on a diagnostic screen you just read. Yes, sir, I am. How do you know those weapons work? Because the ship has been maintaining them for 4 centuries, sir. Every day for 142,871 days. The rail accelerator batteries are at full charge. The hull has been self-repairing at a rate of 0.4% per year. It's rebuilt itself 1.5 times since it was buried. The reactor is running in preservation mode, and it's producing more power in standby than our entire fleet sector produces at maximum output. This ship didn't break down, Captain. It was put to sleep, and it's been waiting for someone to wake it up. He heard Vasek exhale, a long breath, the kind a man takes when he's about to do something that will either end his career or define it. 20 minutes. 18 now, sir. All hands, this is the captain. Abandon Harrogate. I say again, abandon Harrogate. All personnel to the shuttle bay. Full EVA kit. We are boarding the derelict. This is not a drill. Kale turned back to the console. The diagnostic had reached phase 5. Crew stationed, requiring minimum complement for combat operations. Engineering, 12 reactor management, damage control, power distribution. WAPONS, 24 8 rail accelerator stations, 4 directed energy, 2 gravitational lance, 10 fire control. Helm, 4 navigation, propulsion control, maneuvering. Tactical, 6 threat assessment, electronic warfare, countermeasures. Command, 2 bridge authority, WAPONS release. Damage control, TEAMS, 40 distributed across 8 hull sections. Minimum combat complement, 88. Current complement, 1. 88? They had 212, counting Kale himself, more than double the minimum, enough to staff every critical station and have reserves for damage control and casualty replacement. But none of them had ever seen this ship before. None of them knew its systems. None of them had trained on a reactor that used 19 interlocking rings instead of a toroidal bottle, or weapons that included something that bent gravity, or a hull that healed itself. They were going into combat on a platform they'd known for less than an hour, against a predator species that had never lost an engagement, with a crew that had been repairing survey buoys and cleaning sensor arrays 12 hours ago. But the alternative was dying in the Harrogate while the Vashkari harvested them. And Kale, who had been reading machine diagnostics since he was old enough to hold a spanner, had looked at the 9th Meridian systems and seen something that overrode every rational objection. He had seen a machine that worked, not a machine that might work or used to work or theoretically could work. A machine that was working right now, after 391 years, performing at specification, every system nominal, every diagnostic green. In 24 years of engineering, he had never seen a machine maintained that perfectly. The original engineers had built something that could outlast empires, and it had. He trusted the machine because the machine had earned it, one daily diagnostic at a time, 142,871 days running. 26 minutes until the Vashkari arrived. Kale began pulling up station assignments. The console, as if anticipating his need, generated a crew distribution plan based on modern Terran Navy ratings and cross-referenced them against the 9th Meridian Station requirements. It matched each incoming crew member's service record to the station where their skills would be most effective. It was doing the work for him. 400 years of dormancy, and the ship's computer was still faster and more capable than anything Kale had access to on the Harrogate. He studied the assignment list. The console had placed Vasek on the command station and his XO, Lieutenant Commander Priya Oski, on the tactical display. It had put Daria in charge of weapons section coordination. It had assigned Kale himself to reactor management, the engineering heart of the ship. It had looked at 212 people it had never met and figured out in seconds where each one belonged. The first shuttle docked 11 minutes later. Kale had spent those 11 minutes running through the reactor startup sequence, following the console's step-by-step instructions with the focused precision of a man defusing a bomb. The 19 rings were spinning now, their blue-white glow brightening from a faint pulse to a steady, visible radiance that illuminated the entire core chamber. The temperature in the engineering section had risen to 18 degrees Celsius. The deck plates under his boots vibrated with a deep, chest-rattling power that felt less like a machine and more like a heartbeat. Daria was the first through the airlock. She stopped 2 steps inside and looked up at the corridor ceiling, where emergency lighting panels, dormant for 4 centuries, had begun flickering on in sequence, racing away from the airlock in both directions like a runway being lit. "It knows we're here," she said. "It's been waiting for us," Kale replied. He thrust a datapad into her hands. "Station assignments. Get 12 of our best reactor techs to Engineering Section 3. The rest of the damage control teams to Sections 1 through 8. The ship is generating the deck maps now. Follow the lighting. I need the weapons specialists on Deck 9. And find Chief Voss. The console wants her on the gravitational lance station." Gravitational lance? What is a... "I don't know. Neither does the rest of human civilization, apparently. The ship does. Move." She moved. Behind her, the crew of the Harrogate poured through the airlock in a stream of pressure suits and wide eyes, clutching tool kits and sidearms, and whatever else they'd grabbed in the 3 minutes Vasek had given them to evacuate. Some of them were still pulling on EVA gloves. One young ensign was carrying a framed photograph under one arm. Nobody had left anyone behind. The ship guided them. That was the part that made Kale's skin prickle every time he watched it happen. As each crew member crossed the airlock threshold, the corridor lighting shifted, amber trails branching and splitting, each one leading a different person to their assigned station. Petty Officer Cho, a fire control technician, followed her amber path to Deck 9 and found a weapons console already displaying her name and service record, and a step-by-step tutorial for the rail accelerator targeting interface. Ensign Draco, a 22-year-old helm officer on his first deep space assignment, followed his trail to the forward bridge and found a navigation display that had already plotted the local star chart and was waiting for him to confirm his position. The ship knew them. It had studied the modern Terran Navy's personnel structure, extrapolated the credential formats, and built a profile for every person who stepped aboard. It was orienting 211 strangers to a vessel none of them had ever seen, in real time, while simultaneously tracking an incoming threat and managing a reactor startup. The computational power required for that was beyond anything Kale could calculate. He passed Petty Officer Myra Tang in a corridor. She was a structural engineer who specialized in hull stress analysis, and she was walking fast, her face pale, her datapad showing readings from the self-repair system. "Kale, the ship is growing new hull plating," she said without stopping. "Sections where the burial compressed the outer skin, it's generating replacement panels from internal material reserves. Molecular fabrication. It's building itself while we watch." He nodded and kept moving. There wasn't time to be astonished. Astonishment was a luxury for people who had more than 14 minutes. Captain Vasek himself was among the last aboard. He was a lean man with iron-gray hair and the steady hands of someone who had commanded a warship for 19 years. And when he stepped onto the deck of the 9th Meridian and felt the vibration under his boots, Kale saw something he had never seen in the captain's face before. "Where's the bridge?" Vasek asked. "Forward section, deck 2. The ship is lighting the way." Kale pointed down the corridor where the emergency panels glowed in a steady amber trail leading forward. "It's already assigned you to the command station, sir." "It assigned me." "It scanned everyone who came through the airlock. It knows our ranks, our specializations, our service records, our experience levels. It's putting everyone where they'll be most effective." Vasek looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked forward, following the amber trail, and Kale watched him go and thought about the word he hadn't said out loud yet. Honored. That was what this ship felt like. Not power, though it had that in quantities that broke every scale he knew. Not menace, though the weapon's diagnostic had made his hands shake. It felt like honor. The quiet, bitter kind that comes from being built for a purpose you never got to fulfill. From being hidden away because the people who made you were afraid of what you could do. From waiting in the dark for 400 years with your weapons charged, and your hull healing, and your reactor humming at 62 Hertz, and still being ready when someone finally came. The console chimed again. "VSHKRI Flotilla, 14 minutes to engagement range. Vessel classification update. 12 Hunter KILLERS EST, mass 40,000 tons each. 4 Harvester transports EST, mass 180,000 tons each. 1 command vessel EST, mass 310,000 tons each. Combined flotilla mass 1,410,000 TONNES. Ghost Lance combat mass 2,340,000 TONNES. The 9th Meridian outmassed the entire Vashkari flotilla by nearly 1,000,000 tons, alone. Kale ran to Engineering Section 3. His 12 reactor techs were already there, staring at the 19-ring lattice with expressions that ranged from professional focus to open-mouthed terror. He understood both. "Listen to me. This reactor operates on a spherical lattice principle that none of us have trained on, but the ship's computer has generated station-specific protocols for each of your positions. Follow the prompts on your screens. Don't improvise. If a ring shows amber, report it. If a ring shows red, evacuate the section and report it. We're bringing this reactor from preservation mode to full combat power in," he checked the countdown, 12 minutes. "Sir, that's not possible," said Petty Officer Vren, a reactor tech with 8 years of experience and the kind of careful hands that made him the best containment field calibrator on the Harrogate. "Even a standard fusion reactor takes 30 minutes too. This is not a standard reactor. It's been in preservation mode for 4 centuries. It's not starting cold, it's been warm this whole time. The startup sequence is preloaded. We just have to babysit it while the ship's computer does the work. Stations. Now." They moved. The prompts appeared on their individual screens, and Kale watched as 12 engineers who had never seen this technology before began interacting with it under the guidance of a computer system that was older than any of their grandparents and more sophisticated than anything they'd ever touched. Each screen walked its operator through the exact sequence of inputs required. Confirm this value, verify this reading, Acknowledge this threshold. The ship was teaching them how to run it in real time. The reactor responded. The rings accelerated. The hum deepened from a thrumming to a growl, and Kale felt the growl in his bones and in his teeth and in the small hollow space behind his ribs where fear lived. Power output climbed. 10 to the 13th, 14th, 15th. Each threshold crossed in the time it took him to read the number. The lattice blazed, each ring now trailing a corona of blue-white plasma that illuminated the core chamber like a small sun. The direct view ports dimmed automatically, protective filters engaging for the first time in 4 centuries, still working, still protecting human eyes from a light they were never meant to look at directly. Weapons reporting in, Daria's voice said over the ship-wide channel. All 8 rail batteries responding, directed energy arrays coming online, gravitational lance. Kale, what is a gravitational lance? I still don't know, the ship does. Let it guide Chief Voss. Acknowledged. Voss says the targeting system is handling most of the calculations. She just has to authorize fire. Also, Kale, the fire control display is showing me engagement envelopes. Our weapons range exceeds the Vashkari's buy. This can't be right. What's the number? The rail batteries can engage effectively at 280,000 kilometers. The gravitational lance's effective range is listed as 1.4 million kilometers. The Vashkari's organic projectile launchers have an effective range of approximately 12,000 kilometers. Kale did the math instantly. The 9th Meridian could kill the Vashkari at over 100 times their own weapons range. The Predators would be dead before they could fire a single shot. It's right, he said. That ship was designed to end fights before they started. The 9th Meridian was waking up around him. Not just in the reactor and the weapons and the engines, but in the ship itself. Lights coming on in corridors that hadn't been lit since the 23rd century. Atmosphere generators cycling, flooding compartments with breathable air that smelled faintly of ozone and old metal. The hull groaning softly as thermal expansion worked through joints that had been frozen for nearly 4 centuries. Environmental systems adjusting to the presence of 212 warm bodies, temperature rising, humidity stabilizing, air circulators humming to life. The ship was stretching, like something vast and old rising from a long sleep, shaking off the dust, remembering what it was for. In the weapons section, Daria watched Chief Voss sit down at the gravitational lance station and touch the targeting display. The screen responded with a visual representation of the weapon's effect, a simulation showing gravitational compression applied to a target at range. The target in the simulation was a generic vessel, roughly cruiser-sized. The gravitational lance compressed it to 4% of its original volume in 1.7 seconds. Voss watched the simulation and said nothing for a long moment. Then she looked at Daria and said, very quietly, "This isn't a weapon, it's a sentence." In the damage control section, 8 teams of 5 were familiarizing themselves with the self-repair monitoring consoles. Each console showed a real-time map of the hull, with green indicating healthy plating and amber indicating areas under active repair. The map was almost entirely green. The small amber patches stress fractures from the burial, micrometeorite impacts accumulated over 4 centuries, were shrinking visibly as the self-repair systems worked. Petty Officer Tang, the structural engineer, reported that the repair rate had increased by a factor of 12 since the reactor had come online. The ship wasn't just healing, it was healing faster now that it had power to spare. Bridge to engineering. Vasik's voice was calm now, the way it always was when combat was imminent and the time for doubt was over. Helm reports propulsion online. We are extracting from the planetoid. All hands brace for movement. The deck tilted. Kale grabbed a stanchion as the 9th Meridian pulled itself free from 4 centuries of burial. He felt the ship shudder, felt the grind of rock against hull plating that had been grown into the stone by 391 years of mineral accretion, and then felt unmistakably the smoothness of free flight as the vessel cleared the planetoid's surface and rose into open space. The transition from grinding resistance to frictionless movement was so sudden it nearly knocked him off his feet. The inertial compensators had engaged. They worked. Everything on this ship worked. On his console, the external sensor feed activated. He saw the Vashkari flotilla for the first time. 17 ships, arranged in a hunting formation that looked more like a pack of predators than a military fleet. The hunter-killers were narrow, angular vessels with organic-looking hull protrusions that his sensors identified as biological projectile launchers, compressed organic matter fired at velocities that could punch through standard armor plating. The weapons were grown, not manufactured, living systems. The harvester transports were bloated, slug-like craft with cavernous maws in their bows, ringed with articulated arms that looked designed to scoop and hold. Collection ships for populations. And at the center, the command vessel, a massive, segmented thing that looked like it had been grown rather than built, its hull covered in a chitinous plating that pulsed with green bioluminescence. Neural tendrils connected it to the nearest hunter-killers. Visible biological tethers that suggested the command vessel controlled the flotilla the way a brain controls limbs. The Vashkari hunted sentient species the way a trawler netted fish. In bulk, without malice, without communication. They simply arrived, consumed, and moved on. 80 years, 17 incursions, 0 survivors. 9 minutes. Kale's console displayed something new, a tactical assessment that the ship's computer had generated automatically. It overlaid the Vashkari formation with probability cones showing their likely attack vectors, target prioritization based on their known hunting behavior, and recommended engagement sequences for each of the 9th Meridian's weapons systems. The assessment included a casualty estimate for the Vashkari flotilla if the 9th Meridian engaged at optimal range. Total loss, all 17 vessels, estimated time to completion, under 2 minutes. Under 2 minutes, 17 ships, total loss. The computer wasn't hoping, it wasn't estimating, it was stating a mathematical certainty the way a calculator states the sum of two numbers. The engagement wasn't a battle, it was arithmetic. Engineering to bridge, reactor at 71% and climbing, full combat power in 6 minutes. Understood. Tactical reports the Vashkari are decelerating. They've detected us. Of course they had. The 9th Meridian had just risen from a planetoid trailing a column of silicate debris, and reactor light bright enough to be visible across the system. There was no hiding now. There had never been any possibility of hiding. The console updated. VASHKRI flotilla, behavior change detected. Hunter KILLERS, accelerating to attack speed. Weapons range in, 6 minutes 22 seconds. Ghost Lance weapons range, current all batteries in range at present distance. Kale blinked. The 9th Meridian's weapons could already reach the Vashkari. The entire flotilla was inside the ship's engagement envelope. The Vashkari were still 6 minutes and 22 seconds from being able to fire back. The range disparity was staggering. It meant the 9th Meridian had been designed to kill things before they could even begin to fight. It was not a defensive weapon. It was not a deterrent. It was a judgment, rendered at a distance the enemy couldn't cross before the verdict was complete. He understood now, with the cold clarity of an engineer who has finally read the complete schematic, why they had buried this ship. Not because it didn't work, because it worked too well. Bridge to all stations. The Vashkari are not responding to hails. They have not responded to any hail in recorded history. They will not negotiate. Tactical confirms attack formation. We are engaging. Vasik's voice carried the weight of a man who understood what he was about to do and had made peace with it. The words were simple and flat and absolute. Weapons free. The 9th Meridian fired. Kale didn't see it, he felt it. The gravitational lance discharged with a sound that was less a sound and more a pressure, a momentary compression of everything, air and metal and bone, as though the universe had inhaled sharply and held its breath. His vision blurred for half a second. The deck plates rang like a struck bell. His console showed the effect. A concentrated beam of gravitational distortion that crossed the gap between the 9th meridian and the Vashkari command vessel in 1.3 seconds and struck the segmented hull dead center. The command vessel didn't explode. It collapsed. The gravitational lance compressed the ship along its longitudinal axis, crushing it inward like aluminum foil in a fist. 310,000 tons of warship folded into a sphere roughly 40 meters in diameter in less than 2 seconds. The bioluminescent hull plating flared once, bright green, like a dying nerve firing its last signal, and then went dark. One shot, one kill. The most powerful vessel in the Vashkari flotilla, destroyed in under 3 seconds by a weapon that had been waiting 4 centuries to be used. Kale's reactor board showed a momentary power spike. The gravitational lance had drawn 3.2% of the reactor's total output for a single shot. On the Harrogate, a 3.2% power draw would have dimmed every light on the ship. Here, the 19 rings absorbed the demand without a flicker. The power just flowed, like water from a reservoir so deep you couldn't measure the surface drop. The neural tendrils connecting the command vessel to the hunter-killers snapped. Kale watched on the sensor feed as the severed tendrils whipped through space like cut cables, and the 12 hunter-killers, which had been moving in coordinated precision, scattered. The loss of the command vessel broke whatever neural coordination they'd relied on. They split into 3 groups of 4, each group banking hard in different directions, moving with the panic of pack animals that had just lost the alpha. The rail accelerator batteries opened up. 8 batteries, each firing a 3-kilogram tungsten slug at 0.04 c, 12,000 kilometers per second. At that velocity, the slugs crossed the engagement space in fractions of a second, too fast for evasive maneuvers, too dense for point defense systems to intercept. Each impact was a miniature supernova. The kinetic energy of a 3-kilogram slug at 4% of light speed was roughly 2.16 times 10 to the 14 joules per round. The Harrogate's entire torpedo magazine carried less energy than a single railgun shot. The first salvo killed 4 hunter-killers. 4 simultaneous detonations, brief, bright, and total. Where there had been 40,000-ton warships, there were expanding clouds of plasma and debris. The second salvo, 9 seconds later, killed 4 more. The targeting system didn't miss. It didn't adjust. It simply selected the next 4 targets and fired, and those 4 targets stopped existing. Kale watched the reactor status. Power output was at 93% and climbing. The 19 rings were spinning at full combat speed, their plasma coronas now so bright that the direct view ports in the core chamber had automatically polarized to maximum. The temperature in engineering was 22 degrees. Comfortable. The ship was running smoothly, effortlessly, as if it had been doing this yesterday rather than waiting in a rock for 4 centuries. The third salvo killed 2 more hunter-killers and crippled the 11th. The remaining hunter-killer broke formation and ran full acceleration, heading for open space. The directed energy arrays tracked it. 4 concentrated particle beams that could sustain fire at ranges the rail batteries couldn't hold. They caught it at 340,000 kilometers and cut it apart with a precision that looked less like combat and more like surgery. 12 hunter-killers, 47 seconds. The 9th meridian hadn't taken a single hit, hadn't been scratched, hadn't even been shot at. The 4 harvester transports were trying to run. They were slow, built for bulk collection rather than speed, and they had no weapons that the 9th meridian sensors could identify. They were running dark, bioluminescence extinguished, trying to hide against the background radiation of empty space. It didn't matter. The Ninth Meridian sensor suite had been tracking them continuously from the moment the ship came online. It had assigned each harvester a tracking number and a projected escape vector before the battle had even started. Their thermal signatures alone, the waste heat of 4 biological fusion reactors, each burning at a slightly different temperature, made them individually identifiable at ranges where a conventional sensor array would have seen nothing but background radiation. The ship didn't just detect things. It cataloged them, profiled them, and calculated how to end them, all before anyone asked it to. Bridge to weapons. Harvester transports are unarmed and fleeing. I want firing solutions on all 4 but hold fire. Engineering. Is there a way to disable them without destroying them? Kale checked the weapons menu. The directed energy arrays had a low-power mode designated for. He read the descriptor twice. Surgical disablement of propulsion systems without hull breach. Yes, sir. Directed energy arrays low power. We can burn out their drive systems without breaching the hulls. Do it. 4 shots. 4 hits. 4 harvester transports, each one dead in space, drives dark, hull intact. Whatever was inside them, and Kale forced himself not to think about what Vashkari harvester transports might carry in their cavernous maws, was still alive. The crippled 11th hunter-killer was tumbling, venting atmosphere from a 3-meter breach in its flank. The 9th Meridian sensors showed 6 life signs aboard, fading. Kale looked at them, 6 bioluminescent signatures winking out one by one in the cold, and felt the particular emptiness of a man who has just witnessed something perfectly efficient. Daria's voice came through, quiet. Kale, the weapons system is logging everything. Kill confirmations, munitions expended, power draw per shot, time on target, hit probability, every data point. It's been doing this since the first shot. It's studying its own performance, like it's evaluating whether it's still as good as the day it was built. Is it? The miss rate is 0, Kale. 12 targets, 12 kills, 0 misses. The directed energy array that tracked the runner adjusted its beam 3 times during the engagement to account for the target's acceleration changes. Predictive tracking. It was calculating the hunter-killer's evasion pattern and leading its shots before the target even started to turn. 0 misses. 12 for 12. With a crew that had never touched the weapons before and a reactor that had been sleeping for 4 centuries. The weapons operators hadn't aimed the guns, they'd authorized the ship to fire, and the ship had done the rest. The humans in the loop were there for one reason, to decide whether killing was warranted. The how was the ship's domain. The battle had lasted 93 seconds. Kale sat down on the deck. His legs were shaking, his hands were shaking. He looked at his reactor console and saw numbers that would have been classified as a computational error 12 hours ago. Power output steady at full combat rating, fuel consumption for the entire engagement at 0.003%. Hull integrity at 97.3% unchanged, because nothing had touched them. And he understood, with the exhausted clarity of a man who has just done the most important work of his life, what the 9th Meridian really was. It was the answer to every threat that the Terran Federation had ever imagined, and then decided was too terrible to face. It was the weapon they built when they asked themselves what would happen if something came out of the dark that could not be negotiated with, could not be deterred, could not be outrun, something that hunted sentient life the way a trawler netted fish. And when they built the answer, they looked at it and realized that the answer was more frightening than the question. So they buried it, in the darkest corner of space, in a rock, with its reactor humming at 62 Hz and its weapons at full charge and its computer patient and precise and ready, for 142,871 days, for someone to come along who needed it badly enough to wake it up. He thought about the engineers who had built this ship. 4 years of construction per prototype, Vasek had said. The archive probably held their names, their service records, their design notes. They had poured their careers, their lives into building 7 perfect warships, and then they had been ordered to bury them all and erase every record. They had done it. They had followed orders. But they had also built in the preservation mode, the self-repair system, the daily diagnostics, the credential recognition, the station tutorials, the crew assignment algorithm. They had made the burial conditional. They had said, "Sleep now, but be ready to wake." They had trusted that someday, someone would come who needed these ships more than the galaxy needed them hidden. That was the bitter part of the honor. The engineers who built the Ghost Lance prototypes had done everything right. They had built the finest warships in human history, and their reward had been to watch those warships disappear into rocks in the dark, scrubbed from every database, their names classified, their work rendered invisible. They had accepted that. But they had also quietly, in the way that engineers do, through the systems they designed, through the protocols they built, through the preservation mode that kept those reactors humming for 4 centuries, they had refused to let their work die. Kale, Vasik's voice was quiet now. The battle calm had given way to something else, something that sounded like a man standing in a cathedral and trying to understand the scale of what he was looking at. "I've been reading the ship's historical archive while you were managing the reactor. It's extensive." "What does it say, sir?" The Ghost Lance program was authorized by the Terran Federation Council in 2287. 7 prototypes were commissioned. The 9th Meridian was the 3rd built, completed in 2291. They were designed to operate independently, without fleet support, in scenarios classified as existential predation events. The Vashkari were specifically named in the original threat assessment, along with 11 other predator species. I have not heard of any of them. What happened to the other 6 prototypes? The archive says they were placed in dormancy at separate locations across known space. Coordinates are included. All 7 ships were buried in geologically stable bodies in regions with minimal traffic. A pause that carried the weight of what he was about to say. The locations are now inside the territories of 4 different galactic powers, none of which are allied with the Terran Federation. I don't believe any of them know what's sleeping in their space. Kale absorbed that. 6 more ships, each one identical to the 9th Meridian, 2,340,000 tons of ceramic metallic hull, 19-ring lattice reactor, gravitational lance, self-repairing armor, 340-year fuel endurance. Each one buried in a rock in someone else's territory, running daily diagnostics, maintaining its weapons, waiting for an authorized engineer. 6 more consoles displaying awaiting authorized engineering officer in the dark. 6 more reactors humming at 62 Hz. The Terran Federation had built 7 strategic weapons and scattered them across the galaxy like emergency caches. If all 7 were activated simultaneously, their combined firepower would exceed the total military output of every known galactic power combined, by orders of magnitude. The Ghost Lance program hadn't been a weapons project. It had been an insurance policy against extinction itself. 7 indestructible warships, any one of which could end a fleet, all 7 of which could end an era. 7 ships, 7 Ghost Lances, scattered across the galaxy like seeds planted in the dark, each one with a reactor that produced more than 2,000 times the power of a modern dreadnought. Each one with weapons that could destroy a fleet in under 2 minutes, each one with a self-repairing hull and a patient computer, and a prompt that said awaiting authorized engineering officer. Each one waiting. "Captain, the diagnostic is complete. Phase 7 of 7. Kale looked at the final readout. "Diagnostic complete. All SYSTEMS nominal. Ghost Lance is fully operational. Estimated combat effectiveness, 100%. Note, this vessel was designed for permanent assignment. Crew departure will initiate 90-day preservation mode countdown. Recommendation, retain crew, resume patrol." Resume patrol. As if it had just been on a break. as if 391 years of dormancy was an extended shore leave, and now it was time to get back to work. Cale leaned back against the console and closed his eyes. He was 41 years old. He joined the fleet at 17 because his father had been a machinist on the Ganymede shipyards, and his mother had been a damage control officer on the TFS Resolute, and he'd grown up knowing that the machines humans built were the thin line between civilization and the dark. He'd spent 24 years maintaining that line, fixing what broke, keeping the lights on, doing the quiet, unglamorous work that nobody noticed until something stopped working. And now he was sitting in the engineering section of the most powerful warship ever built by human hands, a ship that had just destroyed a Predator flotilla in 93 seconds without taking a single hit, and the ship was asking him to stay. He opened his eyes and looked at the reactor. The 19 rings were spinning at a steady, sustainable rate, their plasma coronas a beautiful, constant blue-white that filled the core chamber with light. The hum was steady. The temperature was comfortable. The ship was alive and whole and waiting for his answer. On the console beside him, the daily diagnostic log continued to scroll. Day 142,872, today, had already been entered. The ship had logged the engagement. 17 Vashkari vessels neutralized, 0 damage sustained, 0 crew casualties, weapons expenditure at 0.003% of reserves. It had appended a note that Cale hadn't expected to see. Crew performance assessment, exceptional. Untrained personnel achieved 100% operational effectiveness within 26 minutes of boarding. Note, this exceeds projected orientation benchmark by 34%. The ship had been evaluating them, not just guiding them, evaluating their performance against a benchmark that someone had established 4 centuries ago, and they had exceeded it. 212 survey crew, most of whom had never been in combat, had outperformed the projection by a third. Cale wasn't sure whether to feel proud or unsettled. The ship was grading them, the way a teacher grades students, the way a mentor assesses whether their protege is ready. Daria. Here. What do your boards look like? Green across the board, every station, every system. This ship is. It runs like nothing I've ever touched, Cale. The fire control systems anticipate what I need before I ask for it. The damage control teams are reporting that the self-repair systems are already patching microfractures from the extraction, the hull stress from pulling free of the planetoid. It's fixing itself while we stand here. How do you feel? She paused, the kind of pause that means someone is choosing their words carefully. I feel like I'm standing inside something that was built with more care than anything I've ever worked on. Like whoever designed this spent their whole lives getting it right, getting every system and every redundancy and every line of code exactly where it needed to be. And then they walked away, because they were afraid of it. They were afraid of what it could do. I know, I read the archive. 7 ships, 7 prototypes, 4 years of construction each, and then they buried all of them rather than let anyone use them. Another pause. The Vashkari have been hunting people for 80 years, Cale. 0 survivors from contacted populations. Whole colonies stripped. And this ship that could have stopped every single one of those incursions, has been sitting in a rock for 4 centuries, perfectly ready, because the people who built it were more afraid of its power than they were of the things it was designed to fight. Cale nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Captain Vasek, this is engineering. Go ahead. Sir, I'd like to request a change of assignment, for myself and any crew member who volunteers. What assignment, Cale? The 9th Meridian, sir. She needs a crew. She's needed one for a long time. Silence on the channel. Cale counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He could hear the bridge behind Vasek, the hum of systems, the quiet breathing of officers who were listening to this exchange, and knowing that whatever was said next would determine the rest of their lives. Kale, if we do this, we don't go home. Fleet Command will want this ship secured, classified, studied. They'll want to put it back in a rock somewhere and stamp classified on it and pretend they never found it. Then we don't report to Fleet Command. Not yet. We have 90 days before the ship enters preservation mode if the crew departs. That's 90 days of operational patrol. The Vashkari have 17 documented hunting grounds across the frontier. The 9th Meridian can reach every one of them. You're suggesting we go rogue. I'm suggesting we do the job this ship was built to do, sir. The job it's been waiting 391 years to do. After 90 days, we report in. We tell them everything, the ship, the program, the coordinates of the other 6 prototypes. But first, we make sure the Vashkari can't hunt anyone else. He heard Vasek breathe. All hands, this is the captain. I am issuing a voluntary assignment notice. Any crew member who wishes to remain aboard the 9th Meridian for an extended patrol of Vashkari hunting grounds, report to the bridge. Any crew member who wishes to return to the Harrogate and report to Fleet Command as ordered, remain at your current station, and you will be shuttled back within the hour. No judgment either way. This is a choice, and I will respect it absolutely. Kale listened to the ship-wide channel. He listened for the sound of people leaving their stations, walking to airlocks, choosing to go home. He heard nothing. For 30 seconds he counted. He heard nothing but the hum of the reactor and the steady breathing of 211 people who were making a decision. Then Daria's voice, level and certain. Weapons section, all 24 stations manned, staying. Then Vren, the reactor tech who had told him 30 minutes ago that bringing this reactor online was impossible. Reactor team, all 12, staying. Then one by one, every section reporting in. Helm 4 officers staying, Tactical 6 officers staying. Damage control teams 1 through 8, 40 specialists staying. Medical staying. Auxiliary systems staying. Every station. Every team. 211 people who had woken up that morning on a survey frigate to map dead space and were now standing inside a 400-year-old ghost ship and choosing not to leave. Not because they weren't afraid. They were engineers and technicians and officers who understood exactly what they were looking at and exactly what it meant and exactly what it would cost them. Their commissions, their careers, their place in the chain of command. They were afraid. They stayed because the ship had waited long enough, and because the Vashkari had hunted long enough, and because somewhere in the daily log between entry 1 and entry 142,871, there was a silence that spoke louder than any order, the silence of a machine performing its duty alone, day after day, year after year, century after century, maintaining its readiness for a crew that never came. Until now. And because sometimes the right thing and the safe thing are not the same thing, and the kind of person who becomes an engineer, the kind who fixes what's broken and keeps the lights on, and tends the machines that nobody notices, is exactly the kind of person who understands the difference. Very well, Vasek said, and his voice was steady and final. There was one more report. A voice Kale didn't recognize at first, young, uncertain, the kind of voice that cracks under stress and holds under commitment. Ensign Draco, the 22-year-old helm officer on his first deep space assignment. Bridge to all hands, helm station reporting. I've plotted 17 Vashkari hunting grounds based on the ship's threat database and cross-referenced with current Federation intelligence. Optimal patrol route covers all 17 in 147 days. The ship's computer has already calculated fuel costs, transit times, and engagement probabilities for each location. A pause. I've never flown anything bigger than a shuttle, sir, but the ship is. It's showing me how. The navigation interface is the most intuitive system I've ever used. I think it was designed so that anyone with basic flight training could operate it. Of course it was. The ship had been designed for exactly this scenario, a pickup crew, untrained on its systems, facing an emergency, needing to fight immediately. Every interface, every tutorial, every real-time guide was built for the crew that would come after the original operators were gone. The engineers who designed the Ghost Lance hadn't just built a weapon. They'd built an inheritance, a ship that could teach its own successors how to use it. Helm set course for the nearest Vashkari hunting ground. Best speed. Engineering, bring the reactor to full operational status. Weapons, maintain combat readiness. Kale stood up. His legs had stopped shaking. His hands were steady on the console. He entered the command sequence that would bring the 9th Meridian's reactor from 93% to 100%, and he watched the 19 rings respond, spinning faster, burning brighter, filling the core chamber with the light of a small star. The ship's computer displayed one final message as the transition completed. Ghost Lance fully operational. Crew 212 of 340. Status active patrol. Time since last active patrol 142,871 days. Welcome back. Kale read those 2 words and felt something crack in his chest, not pain, but release. Like a lock opening, like a door that had been sealed for a very long time swinging wide. Welcome back, as if the ship had known, across 4 centuries of silence and dark and waiting, that someone would come. As if the engineers who built it had trusted that much in the people who would come after them. On the forward bridge, Vasek settled into the command chair. It adjusted to his frame automatically, seat height, armrest width, display angle, all shifting in tiny increments until it fit him the way a well-worn glove fits a hand. 400 years since anyone had sat in it, and the chair remembered what a human body needed. The displays around him showed the tactical situation, the disabled harvester transports drifting behind them, the debris fields that had been hunter-killers, the empty space ahead where the hunting grounds waited. He looked at the navigation plot Draco had laid in. 147 days, 17 hunting grounds. In 93 seconds, the 9th Meridian had ended an 80-year predation campaign at one location. In 147 days, it could end the campaign entirely. Not with treaties, not with deterrence, with the simple, absolute application of force that the Vashkari had never encountered, because nothing in the galaxy had been built to match what they were, nothing except a ship that had been buried because the people who built it understood the weight of what they'd made. The 9th Meridian turned its bow toward the stars, and its engines lit the dark behind it in a blue-white flare visible for 2 million kilometers, bright and steady and unmistakable. Not hiding, not dormant, not waiting anymore. The first Vashkari hunting ground was 9 days away at full sublight. Kale ran the numbers on fuel consumption and found that at current operational tempo, the 9th Meridian could sustain continuous combat patrols for 340 years before requiring refueling. 340 years, longer than the ship had been asleep. Behind him, Petty Officer Vren, the reactor tech who had told him that bringing the reactor online in 12 minutes was impossible, was calibrating the containment fields on Ring 17 with the quiet focus of a man who had found his calling. Vren's hands moved across the console with the same care he'd shown on the Harrogate, but there was something different in his posture, a steadiness. He was working on a machine that deserved his best, and he knew it, and the knowing had changed the way he stood. Across the ship, 212 people were settling into stations that had been empty for 391 years, adjusting seats that remembered human dimensions, reading displays that had been written for eyes like theirs, operating systems that had been designed from the first line of code to welcome whoever came next. The 9th Meridian had been built by engineers for engineers, and the crew of the Harrogate, a ship full of technicians and specialists, and people who fix things for a living, were exactly the kind of crew it had been waiting for. He placed his palm on the console, felt the warmth of the metal through his suit glove, and got back to work. There were 17 hunting grounds to clear, 0 survivors from previous Vashkari contacts to avenge, and a ship that had waited 391 years for someone to give it a purpose. The engineering section hummed with the sound of 19 rings spinning in perfect synchronization, and Lieutenant Commander Soren Kale, who had woken up that morning to fix broken fuel injectors on a survey frigate, tended the heart of the most powerful warship humanity had ever built, and understood, for the first time in 24 years of service, that the machines he maintained were not just keeping the lights on. They were keeping a promise that someone had made 4 centuries ago in a shipyard whose name had been erased, by engineers whose faces had been forgotten, a promise that said, "When the worst thing comes, the answer will be ready." The worst thing had come. The answer was awake. And somewhere ahead, in the dark between the stars, the Vashkari were hunting. They had been hunting for 80 years. They had consumed entire populations without resistance, without consequence, without ever encountering anything that could make them stop. They had never encountered the 9th meridian. In 93 seconds, they would learn what 391 years of patience looked like when it finally moved.